So welcome to, oh my God, Apple is gutting Server.app. With this, I wanted to look at how to migrate your services away from Server.app. I wanted to take a look at different options for the migration. And a little caveat I want to include is that this is just my experience. It is not necessarily universally true. And I'm hoping that it can be somewhat of a discussion for those who have done any of the transitions, those who are looking to do it and what they've researched. So if you do have questions, put up your hand and we'll get you the catch box. And then we can talk. One thing to note is that I've put a web address on every single slide, and that is where you can go and get the Google slide deck. So if you ever want to look at the speaker notes or anything, or any of the links that are in there, you have access to that there. And it's on every slide, so if you don't care right now and you care later, you can get to it. So I'm Adam Anklewicz. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Slack. You can find my website, which is sometimes dedicated to music, sometimes it's dedicated to television or film, sometimes, occasionally, IT stuff. So there's a bit of everything up on there. But I'm also the IT manager for the Leo Beck Day School. We're an IB World School, and we're the only Reformed Jewish day school in all of Canada. We have campuses in Toronto and Toronto suburb called Vaughan. We have an IT department of 2 people, and we're looking for a third. So if you're legal to work in Canada and you want to send me a resume, that's my work email address. But you must be legal to work in Canada. One last thing before I start is I want to give a little hat tip to Charles Edge, who, after I submitted this presentation, I saw he was putting a lot of the similar stuff on his website. And so that was a great resource for me, and his website is going to be, I think, a great resource for anyone who's looking to do this migration themselves. So what I'm hoping to focus on is Mac OS. And the reason why I wanted to do that is because if you've got Server.app running at the moment, you've got a piece of Mac hardware sitting in your server room. And you don't want to junk that, I assume, and you are, I assume, comfortable in Mac OS, and you want to continue using that. So everything in here is focused from going to Server.app to another solution on a Mac OS machine. So I want to know what you all are using for Server.app for. Anyone want to start? Monkey? Yeah.
Card dev.
Sorry, card dev? Not going to get to that, but awesome.
Profile manager.
Profile manager? Yeah. NetBoot? Yeah.
Caching server.
Caching server. Awesome.
DNS.
DNS? Sorry, just internal DNS? Yeah. Everything that's going away. Awesome. File sharing. Sorry? Wiki. Awesome. So what I'm going to actually be touching on are these services. So web, DNS, Wiki, DHCP caching, and net install. And I think we're going to have time for discussion. So if there's other things that we want to talk at the end, let's hash it out and figure things out. But I had to keep the scope somewhat limited. So what I did was I set up using VMware Fusion, I set up a simple OS X server install. I had that running so that what I could do is I could clone that machine, I could initiate a service, set it up, clone that machine, then do the transition from one way, go back to that machine, clone it again, do another transition, go back to the original, set up another service, and go through that. So I started with web, where I had to get the base settings for web set up. I had to make sure it was working. I wanted it to have a DNS entry. I wanted to make sure that it was accessible outside. I also wanted to make sure that it had a certificate, where I have previously documented on my website how to use Let's Encrypt to get a certificate into Server.app. Then I installed Monkey Report. The reason I used Monkey Report was twofold. One is it has a database. Another one is that it's PHP. And finally, it was because I use it. My production Mac Mini that is running Server.app has Monkey on it. It has Monkey Report, and it is a fantastic tool. So I started off with the migration by going to MAMP Pro. MAMP not Pro, regular MAMP. It's the free version. There is a Pro version that costs money. For those who don't know what LAMP is an acronym for machines that are running Linux with Apache, MySQL, and PHP. MAMP is a iteration of that. I think they took their name in the M to mean Macintosh or Mac OS. But they also have a Windows version for some odd reason. I don't quite understand that, but MAMP is that. And one of the cool things about it is it has a GUI, which if you're using Server.app, you will be quite comfortable with. This is probably the only place that we're going to see a GUI in the rest of the presentation. MAMP has that, and it's a decent GUI. So first thing I needed to do was I needed to download MAMP, I needed to turn off the website service in Server.app, and I needed to install MAMP. At that point, I needed to go into the applications folder, into the MAMP folder, and launch MAMP. At which point I had this lovely image where I had a big start-stop button, which, if you're familiar with Server.app, that's a great thing to have. So I pressed the big button, and I tested it, and it worked. Fantastic. So once it was working, I went into the Preferences pane, I went to the Web Server pane, and I redirected the web root from their default into Library Server Web Data Sites default. If you're using Server.app for web, you probably know that and memorize that. And I tested it, and it was working. I then came back, and I pressed that magic button that says Set Web and MySQL ports to 80 and 3306. And magically, it was now working on port 80 rather than its default of 8080. So, MAMP, I'm done. Well, sorta. We need to discuss data security. So, on my Server.app machine, I had already set up Let's Encrypt to get a certificate. And I documented on my blog, so that's a screenshot from there. The URL to the specific post is in the speaker notes there if you wanted to head to it at any point. For those who don't know what Let's Encrypt is it's a certificate authority that provides you with a free 90-day certificate. So if you don't have to pay, you just get this 90-day certificate. You do have to renew it, obviously, every 90 days. It's a bit more of a pain than when you pay and you get a 1-year one or a 2-year one. But it does the job quite well, and it's nice and quick and easy. I couldn't find any documentation on how to get Let's Encrypt into Server.app, so I had to figure it out myself, and I documented it on the website. But basically, all you have to do is you install Homebrew. You install certbot through Homebrew. Certbot, then what it does is it puts a file document into your public web root directory. Let's Encrypt servers go and check that and make sure it's accessible. And then they say, okay, well, you do own this website, so I can grant you a certificate. It grants you the certificate. It throws it into a folder. It's somewhere that's not the most easy to access. So I use Terminal to copy it to my desktop, at which point I could drag and drop those files into Server.app. So now I've got these files sitting on my desktop, and so I have to get them into MAMP somehow. So to do that, I first needed to rename them. First off, Let's Encrypt gives you them with the names privkey.pem and fullchain.pem, and I needed to get them into .key and .crt files, using the fully qualified domain name as the precursor to that. At which point I put it into the Apache configuration folder, and I edited the HTTPD configuration file by uncommenting the SSL line. So then at that point, you have to make a few changes to the SSL configuration document, and that is to change the path to the certificate, the path to the key, the server name, and also the server location, folder location. Once you've done that, you're done. And this time, really. So that's how easy it is to actually set up MAMP. It took me about 35 minutes to get it up and running, and everything that I needed to run Monkey Report was there and ready to go. But I wanted to take a look at another process, so I took a look at doing it through Apache. So those who don't know, Apache actually comes pre-built into to Mac OS, not OS 10, Mac OS. And so there's nothing to install, everything's ready to go. So I tested the existing server. Everything was working fine in Server.app, so once again, I turned off Server.app in this new VM. I then went into the configuration file for Apache, and I uncommented the PHP line. I restarted Apache, or actually I started Apache, and I tested it to make sure it was working through the Apache service rather than the Server.app web service. It was working, but it was not putting any of my content up yet. I still had to get my content over there. But before that, I wanted to test to make sure PHP was working. So I created a PHP info document. For those who don't know, there are a couple things to notice. One is that the root directory for web is different than it was for Server.app. So rather than library, server, web, sites, default, you then have just library web server documents, which honestly slightly easier to remember. The other thing to notice here is what I actually put in there. I don't know who's familiar with PHP, but if you are, you'll know that this little script will show the information about your server. If it's not working, if PHP is not working, all you're going to see is that text, which is a quick indication to see if your PHP is working. It was. And so I browsed to that website, and I was able to see the PHP server information, and everything was good. Then I needed to transfer my files from the default server app location to the Apache server location. And I tried two things. First, I tried dragging and dropping, and it didn't work. I didn't know why. It took me a bit to figure it out. And so then at one point, I'm just like, screw this. This took me about 5 minutes to get where I am now. I'll reclone the machine, start again. And I tried rsync instead. Had the same problem, but then I quickly realized I'm an idiot. It was permission errors. And so I set the permissions properly, restarted Apache. Suddenly, it was all working. Well, once again, sorta. We still need to talk about data security. And for those who are saying anything, yes, I know that season 1 and Worf was not in security, but data's falling. You gotta approve of that, right? So to enable SSL, we needed to edit the HTTP configuration file. We needed to uncomment the modules that it needed to load for SSL. We needed to uncomment the include for the configuration file for SSL. Save that, write that out. Then we need to edit the vhosts file, at which point we need to put in the server name for the SSL, the HTTPS version. We need to put in the names for the certificate files, and also we need to take note of where those certificate files are living. In this case, it's Etsy Apache 2 SSL. So now we know that. We already know from before that we just need to drag and drop them from our desktop in there and rename the files to their right name, their proper name. At this point, save and exit, restart Apache, test it, and this time it actually works. And there's no Canadians who are getting this joke, I'm assuming. It's from a great TV show called Twitch City. You should all watch it. And so that was my journey for transferring from web. I found Apache was slightly more difficult. I found that it didn't have MySQL, and I thought that that was somewhat important. I found when doing Apache, I didn't do that drag and drop with the, sorry, I did the drag and drop and I had that permissions error. And so that took me a bit extra time. Whereas with MAMP, I had the weird issue where I didn't know you had to rename the Let's Encrypt files from .pem. And so I was searching, well, how do I get a .key and .cert file? And spending all this time going, how do I do this? And then I realized, oh, I just renamed this file and it works. So it was slightly magic. Before we go on away from web, anyone questions, comments? Yeah.
Is there any way to get MAMP to run if the user's logged out?
I didn't look into that. That's a good question. I don't know. Does anyone else know? All right. Sorry.
And how do you get both of those to survive a restart, like to automatically fire back up?
We always used an auto login to auto log into one of the accounts.
Okay, auto login, but then how would you get it to launch MAMP? Login?
Yeah,
Okay.
MAMP does start automatically.
And then what about Apache? Is there a hook that you can make to have it fire up automatically?
I thought it did.
So if you start it in the command line and then reboot the computer, even at the login window it's running?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
If not, then you launch V or something.
Yeah, you can create a daemon to do that. Yeah, the gentleman back there.
I don't want to hit you. So I use Let's Encrypt with the Apple server, and I don't rename my certificates when they come in. I just dump them in. So is that
With
something
Server
that's
app,
just
you don't
with,
need to.
What's that?
With Server app, you don't need to.
Okay, so that's just something with.
And I'm
with
not
the
even
man-
sure you need to with the other services, but the documentation all said it was a .key and .crt file. So I just figured following the way it was working, you probably could just get away with the .pem files.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
The answer to that question over there is just launch CTL. If you add the P list for Apache. If you add the P list for Apache to launch CTL, it'll start at the login window.
awesome.
Did you look into Nginx at all, or just the Apache stuff?
I did.
Okay.
Very briefly, the reason I stopped was, which is something you're going to see as a trend as it goes further. I got to the point where it was taking me, I think I was at an hour, and I figured that the point of this talk is core foundation, and I figured that people are looking for something simple, and Nginx wasn't quite fitting that from my experience, though someone else might have a different experience and found it better. I also looked at, I'm forgetting the other one off the top of my head because I did the website the first thing I did. So that was when submissions took place, what, 6 months ago? So yeah, I'm forgetting the other one, but I looked at one other, and that one took even longer. And I just figured that was not where we wanted to go.
The only thing I'm going to throw out there is I still want to investigate it myself, but a lot of people have said that Nginx is a lot better with static content, like a monkey repository. You usually get better performance out of it. So I agree, Apache and MAMP is going to be 10 times easier to set up, but if you have a larger fleet checking into the server, Nginx may be better to look into. Something to say
Yeah,
there.
but also you're running it on a Mac Mini, which can probably handle Apache quite well. But yeah,
Right.
I do see that. Yeah, Graham?
On the note of Nginx handling connections, unless you have like 5,000 machines checking in all at once, you're not going to notice a difference.
Okay, and for my experience, I have a school with 80 teachers, 800 kids, and about a dozen admin staff, so we weren't quite there.
And if you're running on a Mac Mini, you only have 1 gig out of the machine anyway. So.
Yeah. Oh, and more.
Ready?
Yeah.
So, when you asked at the beginning of the class, you said who's using what. So we're still using the sus, even though it's going to be going away. So, do these two applications do sus or?
No, that's you would need another software such as Reposado.
Okay. So it would run it would run inside of them or on the or somewhere in.
Yeah, it's similar, I believe, to Monkey. I've never actually used Reposado, but I believe it's similar to Monkey in the sense that it's just a web server, and so you can host your content anywhere. Am I wrong about that? No? Okay, perfect. So yeah, you can host that in any web server, and it would work. But yeah, I've never actually run it myself. I did investigate it and realized that it just wasn't needed as a use case for my environment.
Reposado.
Yeah.
And are there any other products that you kind of recommend for the sus replacement if you want to stay on Mac OS?
I don't think there are any others.
There's Margarita, which is like a web UI for Reposado, but it's still Reposado.
So Margarita, which is a web UI, but it's also running Reposado as well. Sorry, just repeating because you didn't have the mic. Okay, so let's move on to DNS. There were 3 that I was looking at. I was looking at bind, unbound, and not. And I'm going to give you a bit of a sneak peek in the sense that bind was super simple. Apple has documentation about it. It brings across all of your configuration for you, and it works really simply. When I was trying unbound and not, I kept on hitting walls and hitting walls and hitting walls and hitting walls. With them, I got the shortest distance with not. I went a bit further with unbound, but the homebrew install seemed to be missing content. It kept on giving me errors saying command not found. And when I was searching for solutions, there was very little community talking about it. There was even less people running on Mac. I don't think I saw anyone running any of these on Mac. So I basically felt I was kind of in this island alone, and no one was doing that. And I don't think anyone wants to do that in production. So at that point, I think I was about 3 hours into both of those when I gave up. And I just said, this is not worthwhile, because who would want to run something like this? So I'm going to run you through how easy it is to switch to bind. So first I had to spin up a machine, turn on DNS, set up a zone for a domain, put in some entries, and point some client machines to it. And Apple's guide is great, but I actually found a couple errors. And in addition to that, I actually found it wasn't as detailed as I would like. I work in a school. I like stuff that is very do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. Don't forget to do this. Whereas Apple kind of assumed you had some knowledge that you might not necessarily have had already. So I actually expanded on theirs, using theirs as a base post, and blogged about that as well. So the first thing you need to do is download bind. To do that, you click on downloads, you expand the bind section, you click on the current stable release, you find the Unix installer, which is the tar.gz file. You click on that link, and you also download a signature too. Now, why did I just go through every single step on the website? Because it's a terrible, terrible website. And it just doesn't, it makes sense when you say it that these steps make sense, but looking at it, I was just, this didn't really work in any sense to me. So once you've got it, you navigate to where it downloaded, you uncompress it, you navigate into that uncompressed directory, you configure it, you run the installer. To check to make sure it works, you can run the man command. And if you don't know what the man command is, it pulls up the manual for a terminal command. So if you run man ls, it tells you how to use the ls command to list the contents of a directory. Bind's agent is called named, so you type in man named, and if it pulls up anything, it's installed. So once I've got that installed, I needed to create a launch daemon for it. So I created that launch daemon, and all I had to do was copy and paste the contents of the launch daemon from Apple's guide. They had that in there. You just copy and paste. It works perfectly. You need to set the ownership on this record, on that file. And at that point, you need to check out the configuration. So if you go into the name.conf file, you'll see your zone in there. And so my zone of leobeck.ca, it lived into a file called db.leobeck.ca. So then what I could do is I could go back into the terminal and I could edit that, that specific zone file right there. And the zone file is just the name of the zone. So in this case, db.leobeck.ca. So I could then check that the directory, all the content was there. The content was there. I could save it, load DNS, and check it and make sure that it worked. And it did. And that is Bind and how easy it was to set up. I think this one took me about 15 minutes compared to Not and Unbound, where I got to 3 hours and stopped. So if you are running DNS, Bind is a fantastic solution. One of the things that I forgot to mention earlier is that you do have to edit everything in Terminal or these text files, but there is a web GUI I found. I did not test it, so I can't vouch for it being any good, but there is a GUI called WebMin, W-E-B-M-I-N, which you can download, install that over top of it, and you can manage it from there. Any questions before we move on to the next subject?
Could you give just an estimate of like how much you knew about DNS going into this? Because I know that Bind is a fantastic solution, but for people out there that maybe don't have a lot of DNS experience, like how much did you know that really helped you set it up that easily? So
I've been managing DNS on a Windows server because that's what when I came into LeoBeck 12 years ago, the Active Directory server was already set up. It had DNS set up, and it was running there and running perfectly. So I've been managing it. I've also been setting up external DNS through cPanel most often. And it's always been something that's pretty easy to do, but I've never really gone into the guts like this. So I went really into this with not much knowledge other than configuration knowledge. Yeah.
On a similar note, what's the equivalent DB entry for the aliases that are in DNS
That
service?
is in the that top file. In this one, the name.conf.
Okay.
And that's all managed in there. So this is basically sets up all the zones, and then you would have the aliases for the zones and everything through there.
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
There's also one other GUI that I found
Oh, is there?
that it's semi-abandoned.
that's
But since
fantastic.
Bind is pretty static, it still works quite well, and that's admin4.org.
Very cool.
It's open source, and it just lets you basically do what you do in Server.app, which is just add A records, add C names, add everything.
Awesome. And have you used it personally?
I used it. I used it for a while, and then we transferred our DNS offsite. So
Yeah. Awesome. Oh, sorry.
Not a question, but I set up a similar DNS server not too long ago, and I don't like editing the things through the command line, just my personal preference. So I use Text Wrangler. So all you got to do is navigate in the Finder to the file and open it in Text Wrangler, and if it doesn't have permissions, it'll ask for a local admin account or if it needs to save, and it always puts it back to the same permissions as it was. So if you're looking for a GUI Text Wrangler will do it.
Yeah, I don't know. I always default to just using Nano, even though most people hate Nano, and it's like Vi or Emacs, and then I'm always on the side going Nano. But that's just because it was the first one I learned, and I liked it, and I didn't bother learning something else. Yeah.
Hi, one more question, going back to the web server
Yeah.
bit a little. Did you try to authenticate against the Active Directory with logins and things like that?
No. My experience, and from everyone I talked to who were using web, no one was doing that. So I've got no idea how you would do that. All right, so next, yeah, I went back, didn't I? So Wiki. This is a weird one. I don't know who's read Apple's documentation on the migration, but they basically suggest that to get data out of your wiki, you have two solutions. You can export it as static websites. And personally, I don't feel that that's a wiki anymore. That's static websites, so that feels kind of useless. The other option they have is you can export it as a WordPress backup, which then you can import into a WordPress site. Again, I don't feel that's a wiki. If you're familiar with WordPress, which I am, I use it for my site, I use it for my work site, I've used it way too many places. It is a fantastic service, but it is not a wiki. So I have no idea what the solution is other than install MediaWiki on the server, which if you're not familiar with MediaWiki, that's the open source software that Wikipedia uses and makes. I would then just hire a couple high school students during summer break and have them copy and paste content. Does anyone have a solution for this? Because I know at least one person has mentioned it to me that this is what they're looking for.
Run 1012 on a Mac Mini.
Running 1012 is maybe the better bet. Eventually it might stop working though. But yeah, so that's my solution to Wiki is this is ridiculous and bad idea either way. So I didn't get very far. Then let's move on to DHCP.
Wiki.js.
Wiki.js?
Just run it on your Apache server.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So
just
that's similar
use an
to,
open source
yeah, similar
wiki
to
and
using
just
MediaWiki.
fire
That's
it in.
another brand. So for DHCP, I decided that I would not be rude to my entire faculty and all my students and turn DHCP off at work. And instead, I did this one at home. My wife wasn't very happy for that time, but, you know, what can you do? So once again, I started Server.app. I turned the DHCP service on. I set up the basic configuration in Server.app, and then I checked to see if the devices were connecting, and it actually worked really easily. I've actually, before that, I had not used DHCP on Server.app, and I was impressed at how easy and straightforward it was to use. When you need to do the migration, so I turned off DHCP on the Server.app device. I did an if command, which Apple suggests in their guide, to find out which port your Ethernet is on. So I needed to know that I'm on EN0. And this little bit of information is going to be useful in the very near future. So just write that down, or hopefully you can remember EN0 or EN1 or whatever yours is. I entered that data into just under the first dict entry in the boot PD plist. So I added the key for DHCP is enabled with an array saying on this port. I saved, I exited. Basically, then I just loaded the launch daemon, and it worked. It was so insanely simple that, once again, I didn't feel a need for another service because this one just worked. And this one, I did not find any errors in Apple's documentation. The only caveat I would note is that they put some line breaks in between some of the commands that you have to do. So that first one there, the launch CTL command, there was a line break in between launch daemon / and boot PS. So one person already giggled. If you run that without noticing that, it's going to start all of the launch daemons it can inside that directory, which was not fun and makes you start over from scratch. So be sure that you copy that, paste it into a text editor, delete that before you paste it into the terminal. Before we go to caching, anyone have anything to add to DHCP? It's really simple and it works, so I'm not surprised there's not much. All right, caching server was even easier. So for those who don't know, Apple has taken caching server and they've put it into the base OS. So all you have to do is go into your sharing pane and check it off. You can configure it and go into the options and decide how much space you want to give it, whether it's, unlimited or if it's just a gigabyte or anywhere on that spectrum. And that's all you really need to do is just check it off. And easy. Caching service is great. Net install, I don't think I'm allowed to put a screenshot here. So oh, sorry.
Before you move to caching server, there's a hidden thing that Apple told me about.
There's a hidden thing that Apple told you about.
Yeah, it's semi-hidden. It's the standard hold down the option key and you get advanced options and you can configure things like peering, clients, parents. There's a whole lot of caching server options.
So you hold down option.
When you click on the options button, it turns it into advanced options.
So I did that and it didn't do anything for me. Because I was like, there has to be more settings. Let's give it a shot. See, option didn't work, control didn't work, shift
Yeah,
didn't work.
if you do it, it changed. When you hold down option, it changes the title of the button to advanced options.
Yeah.
And the other big thing is it doesn't work under VM.
Oh. Oh, no, I was checking with my actual machine. But yeah, so sharing option, yeah. I am holding down the option key.
No, go.
Oh, there we go. Oh, advanced options. It was just in a bad mood, apparently. So if it doesn't work, try again. Awesome. So, and now we all learn. Awesome. That's so cool. Thank you. Yeah.
It's also super easy to just make a profile. You can configure the content caching with a profile.
Oh.
And then it just does whatever you want, so you don't have to.
And I know you can
Look
also
through everything.
block content caching with a profile.
Yep.
So that people don't turn it on and then you have 20 caching servers going on your network.
I have 800.
Yeah, you're a bigger organization than.
Well, no, like yeah, I make all my laptops that are hardwired in caching
Okay.
servers.
Huh.
So I don't have a Mac Mini in a data center anymore. But yeah, that's fun.
Do they conflict with each other at all? No?
Smart figures it out.
Okay, cool. That's really awesome.
I was really surprised.
Let's go back in here. Oh, and wrong window. That's what I get for getting out of Google Slides. It's not the best, but it does the job. And then I've got these resources, and we've still got 40 minutes. So any questions, any comments about any of the stuff we didn't touch on? The gentleman in blue had his hand up first.
What did you all do for net install? Anything?
Oh, sorry, we
Just
didn't
kinda
go
go
there.
through that.
I'm sorry, I assumed we did.
For all of our deploy studio people.
Yes. So Server.app still has net install in it. It's just hidden in the new version that's in beta. Apple told me that yesterday at the presentation. I didn't think I could put a screenshot up, so I didn't even bother downloading it, also on the network. But apparently it's just there. If not, Apple's documentation for the current version is basically just run it outside of Server.app, because you can just turn everything on in terminal and it works. You just don't get the GUI that doesn't really show you anything. Anyway, it just shows you which ones you had. So then we're at the resources page. Sorry about that. Anyone want to have experience with Profile Manager and solutions for that? Honestly, for that, I've been of the opinion that Profile Manager is not meant to be a production use thing. And as Apple says, throw that into an MDM solution. But I've noticed you giggling over there. But that is, that's my opinion on it. I don't know if other people have anything or any of the other services. I guess not. All right, yeah.
So I'm looking for a replacement for AFP file server.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't messed around with Netatalk yet, but that's the only one I've found online. Does anyone know of another way to reproduce AFP? Okay, on a Mac. I guess you could run Windows on in a VM and run, what's it called now, Kronos Files Connect, which is what Extreme ZIP became, which is a solid solution, but I'm looking for a Mac solution.
AFP implemented by other companies. We have QNAP and Synology NASs at our place. AFP, when it's implemented by other companies, it's horrid.
And I think those both use Netatalk, don't they? Synology does, I know.
Synology does. QNAP uses something else, but it's
No good.
I've had a number of problems with both of them. I've gone up the chain to their senior support, and basically what it comes down to is they said every Linux system trying to support AFP has the same.
Okay.
I'm not going to try to summarize that to get it on the mic, but it doesn't work with a third-party solutions well, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
All right. Well, oh no, sorry.
Anything for patching the services? Typically, we're running Server.app. Apple doesn't put the latest Apache in there. We have information security saying you need to patch this, and we say, well, the vendor's only providing this version.
Yeah.
Now that we can get kicked out of that, I think the two options you had for MAMP, does MAMP continually
MAMP
update
has frequent updates, and it's really just a drag and drop it. No, it's a package installer. So upgrading that is should be super simple. The other ones are services that are just built into the OS. And when the OS upgrades, I would assume that Apple's updating those services sometimes. I wouldn't assume it's always, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the best approach would be. You could just do a straight brand new Apache install with something like Homebrew and patch it through there. Same with, I assume also with Bind, but it might not bring across your configuration over. So maybe you'd want to do the migration, grab the configuration files, then install it through Homebrew and bring those configurations into it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is this for the recording or something?
Yeah.
All right. So could you just clarify what Apple's current position is on Server.app? I think I understand it. I think what they've said is that if you already have these services set up in your current environment, when you install the new app that's supposed to deprecate all these services, they will continue to work. So you have some time before you move to an alternative. Is that correct?
I'm going to start with no, I can't clarify Apple's position because I don't work for Apple. And I don't think that they would want me to. But what I can say is, from what I understand, that is correct, that the services will continue to run. I don't know how long, but they are also suggesting you do these migrations, and they have that doc that is, I should point that way, you're not looking there, the Apple Server Service Migration Guide, which is how they are suggesting you migrate. And honestly, I'd say it's a very good document, and it was fantastic, a guide. And I would also say that Charles Edge's website, Cryptid, will get you a less Apple bent version, and then also my website for how I migrated some of these services is already up there and gives you my point of view on it. Make sense? Sure. All right.
So to clarify to your question a little bit, the very next version that's coming out, the options will be hidden from the GUI, but they will be there and operational. That's what you know of. It's the version that's after that, is that when they're going to just drop the axe, and those are going to be done at that time. So that's what I've been told by Apple employees. So expect that.
The gentleman in the light blue.
To the article you were looking for, if you're in this room in Slack, PSU Mac 208, if you scroll up to yesterday's session, there's all the links from Apple to the knowledge base articles. And the last one is prepare for changes to server.
Oh, that's full screen. Hold on. Yeah. Oh, hi.
Hello again. So I was just wondering if you are going to remain on a Mac, what are the options for the SUS? And if you're not going to remain on a Mac, what are the options that everyone else is planning on doing?
So it's on a Mac, it's Reposado. On a Linux machine, it's Reposado.
Okay. Well,
On any other hardware that can run a web server, it's Reposado.
So Reposado is the only option. Okay.
As far as I know, yeah. Graham?
I mean, that's only if you want to restrict Apple updates.
That's only.
If you care about getting them out quickly, you can just use caching server or any WAN accelerator.
So yeah, as Graham said, it's only if you are looking to restrict updates, and I guess also to create different pools for stuff. So your test group, your production group, and then maybe your extreme early beta testers kind of thing.
Right. Is there anyone that's using Linux for that, whether it's hosted on a Google server or cloud server somewhere? Yeah.
And we've got two people with their hands up.
How that's going and how you're noticing it works.
Wes can answer, maybe.
I actually don't even, the updates just automatically get sent to CloudFront for me. So I have a Jenkins box that does the pull of the new updates and then just sends them to CloudFront, and then everything's distributed through CloudFront for me. Works really well.
CloudFront's content hosting service?
Yeah, Amazon. It's a CDN.
Oh, okay.
Amazon CloudFront. So, and it's like super cheap too. So,
if you have any scale problems, CloudFront will solve them for you.
all of them, yes.
So yeah, I just had one of my other people set it up onto a Linux virtual server, and we had to put 400 gigs of storage on it for it. But I'm just using it to control what stuff goes into labs internally. I'm not having faculty. I'm not having outside stuff doing it. It's just I want to keep my internal things not, jump into anything automatically. So it just automatically, I release them pretty much, kind of like you used to be able to do with the server app. And then when Monkey checks for updates, if it's there, it goes, hooray, there's an update, and then gets it. So, but it's not that bad.
I should also mention one other thing, and that's if you're using MDM, you can set up your devices to not update for X amount of time. Is it up to 30 or 90 days? 90. Yeah, so you can defer it for up to 90 days, and then that gives you a chance to test it out, make sure it's working, and then hopefully if it's not, Apple will release an update to fix the issue. But yeah. All right. This was awesome. I think we're a bit early, so head to lunch or, hang out, party. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for coming.